Welcome to
Crazy, right?
A podcast
Be your own person.
for those affected by
Crazy, right?
mental health.
I wanted to just try it.
Crazy,
It's something that I've struggled with for a while.
Featuring live improvised music
Now I finally got my head right again.
by your host,
am I right? Crazy,
It feels good to talk about it.
right? Crazy, right?
Dave Asher.
My guest today is speaking anonymously under the initial K. She is a graphic designer living in Chicago who has past experience with bipolar disorder and currently struggles with depression and anxiety and how these relate to issues with sexuality and self-identification. Kay, thanks for joining me today here in my studio. I'm going to step over here to my piano. Are you currently seeing a therapist?
Yep.
Could you tell me a little bit about some of the topics that you and your therapist cover?
Well, kind of whatever's happened to me in the past week, whatever I need to talk about.
What did you talk about at your most recent session?
Most recently, I talked about a little bit about my family, a little bit about my process of coming out as gay, and
Well, could you loop me in on that a little bit? So, how long ago did you come out to your family?
it was a couple years ago, and I told my family first in like private messages, mostly my mom, and then I put something on Facebook publicly after Donald Trump got elected because I sort of felt like things had just gotten too crazy.
How old were you at that point?
So I would have been 25.
Has it been a journey for you yourself to come out in your own mind?
Well, that's the thing. It's been a long time coming. It's something that I kind of knew since I was young, like late elementary school. By junior high, it was already a major anxiety for me, but I always repressed it. I didn't want it to be true, so I just hoped that I could just not think about it.
Why did you not want it to be true?
It's kind of something that society tells you that is not okay to be.
Anything particular about your network of society?
I definitely have conservative family members on my dad's side. My mom's side is a little more liberal, and my mom and immediate family themselves are a little more accepting. But there's also a type of attitude where you can say that you're okay with it and that you accept it, but secretly it still makes you uncomfortable.
You struggle with your mental health as well?
Obviously, homosexuality and gender identity, those are not mental illnesses, but
Right.
they're similar because it's something that society tells you should be ashamed of. My first experience after I had a manic episode and had to go to the hospital when I was recovering from that manic episode, and I wanted to tell everybody everything. I think I made a lot of people uncomfortable in that time because most people didn't understand it. I wanted to talk to people about it. I used Facebook a little bit too much as a tool for that.
After my most recent hospitalization, I was all over Facebook talking about it, coming out about it.
Before I was manic, I was depressed. I had no prior experience with mania. At first, I thought I was just getting better and feeling normal. And I think there was a point where I was there, but it progressed into mania, and I didn't know until it was far too late. I had to be hospitalized. I was pretty out of control. After the hospitalization, it gave me sort of an answer to why I had struggled for so long. Oh, that's why I'm bipolar. At that point, I wanted to be like an advocate for mental health, but people don't really want to hear about that stuff, especially if they have no experience with it. They think you should just sort of keep it to yourself.
What was leading you to feel this way, that people did not want to hear about it or were being judgmental about it?
Well, for me, I guess it was my family. That's what I experienced with my family. All of my friends actually were very supportive, but in general, like at work, for example, I feel like I can't talk about that stuff with my coworkers, at least not until I get to know them well enough. And I know a lot of it is self-judgment. I'm working on that.
Was your conversation with your parents about your mental health, was that different than your conversation about coming out as gay?
Actually, both times they didn't really believe me. They didn't really think that it was true, that I was either bipolar or gay. It's hurtful for people to tell you that you don't actually know what you want, or that you just haven't had enough experience.
Before accepting your sense that you, it sounds like, had from an early age that you are gay, along the way, have you done anything to attempt to convince yourself otherwise?
Oh yeah, like up until as recently as a couple years ago, before I came out publicly, I was still trying to make myself straight, like trying to do things with date men and trying to get used to it as it always seemed to me, but there's no such thing. Like people can pretend for their whole life, but you can't change the way that you are, and I eventually came to accept that, and once I did, it was like a hugest relief. I still feel that relief, and I remember that I don't have to try to do things that I don't want to. Like I can just be the way that I want, and it's fine.
With your mental health, you're unfully diagnosed, is that correct?
Well, so the situation with the manic episode was that it was largely caused by a drastic medication change. Some doctors told me it brought out something that was already there. I don't really have much of a label I can put on myself.
Could you take me back to the first time you remember feeling depressed?
It was off and on for me during elementary school, for sure. When I was 9 or 10, somewhere around there in 4th grade, my parents got divorced, and that was hard for me. So I remember being very, very quiet and not really talking to anybody, not smiling much. People are constantly telling you to smile.
Who was telling you to smile?
A lot of teachers, a lot of authority figures in my life. I see it as it's a sexism issue as well. But I got that from really young because I wasn't smiling enough for people and made them uncomfortable.
What was your reaction to being told that at that age?
Well, I was very compliant. I always did it, but it never felt good. It always felt annoying and like someone was forcing me to do something I didn't want to, just for their own comfort and pleasure of seeing me supposedly happy.
How did the depression manifest itself when it came on?
Yeah, so my first experience with really severe depression was high school. I was actually pulled out of school for a couple of weeks. My therapist at the time wanted to hospitalize me, but it didn't end up happening. I was too scared. So my mom stayed at home with me for a couple of weeks, and that was my first major depression.
Were you then put on medication?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was on a couple different things, but then I was put on one that seemed to be at least somewhat working, so I stayed on that for years, like the same thing all the way through college and after college. And then when I got severely depressed in 2013, that's when I had the major medication shift that I was talking about that ultimately led to the mania. What it was my doctor doubling my antidepressant. And
what led them to do that?
Well, I was really in a bad place. I was suicidal and just really struggling. So I do understand their reasoning behind it. However, I also see it as, maybe a little too drastic for one time. You're not really supposed to just double the dosage of something.
Right.
But I didn't know I was doing what the doctor told me, so I did it. And that's how I ended up manic, and so that's why it's kind of confusing to say whether I'm bipolar or not. I never had any experiences with mania before that, but I don't know, the manic episode was really pretty bad, and so I feel like I can't just dismiss it. It also really messed up my life a lot, so I have to keep it in mind.
And you work in a creative industry, correct?
Yes. Well, I do graphic design sort of stuff. I do a lot of web banners and print pieces like posters and cards and brochures and things like that.
How would you describe the relationship between your mental health and your work life?
The mania that happened in 2014 caused me to kind of really go off the rails, and I ended up quitting my job, my first professional job, in like a screaming, swearing, crying fit over age.
Could you go into that for me, please?
I felt like it was kind of me against everyone. At work, for example, I had this idea that one of my coworkers didn't like me, and she never treated me poorly or anything. I felt like she didn't like me. She was there. She was actually the only one there when I had the kind of meltdown, breakdown, whatever you want to call it. I was on the phone initially with my dad, screaming about how like I hated everyone there and they were all fucking assholes and I just couldn't do it anymore, stuff like that. This is in like a really small, like conservative office. I said that I was quitting, but I mean, obviously they were gonna let me go after that. It was actually later that same day I was hospitalized.
After you got out, did you return to that organization?
No.
How do you find the application process, the courtship process of a new job and disclosure about your mental health?
It was really hard. I especially after the manic episode, I couldn't really work full-time for a while. I had a lot of part-time jobs, and then...
Was this because people were asking about it or because of your mental state?
My state, really. It took probably about a year to recover fully from the mania. And once I did, though, I did get a full-time job that started as freelance. And with the initial interview, I remember being really nervous and scared because he was asking me about, what happened with this other job, like where it just suddenly cuts off and then there's this big gap in your resume. And I was like, I had a medical issue. I didn't know how else to put it. And I thought, I at first felt like I felt bad about it, but then I told myself, well, it's true, it was a medical issue. The problem is no one thinks of mental issues as medical issues, and so he literally thought I had cancer. Like when I got sick again, when I was working there after after like a year, he thought it was cancer. He told me so.
When you meet someone, what would you say is a description of your reaction if you find out that they have a mental illness?
I guess it's hard to think of a time like that because a lot of my friends with mental illnesses I met through specific groups for people with mental illnesses, so there was no coming out necessary. It was already all out there.
Makes sense.
If I did find out that someone I knew or had known for a long time was struggling, I would hope that I would be very empathetic and compassionate towards them because I know how hard that is.
When you were growing up, before you came out to yourself...
As gay, you mean, right?
As gay, yes. Pardon me, as gay, yes. Did you have a reaction to other people who might have been coming out or to portrayals of that story of how people were coming out?
Yeah, I remember when I was little thinking, like, I knew of some people, but I thought that they were considered kind of weird. Like, other people didn't necessarily like them. It was weird, maybe a little gross. And it got a little better as I got older, especially by high school. I knew that being accepting of everyone and everyone's sexuality was what was right. But there was still this feeling like, but I don't want to be. I mean, I can accept it for other people, but not for myself. And I think that's kind of how I felt with my family too. Is they were more ready and able to accept it as long as it was someone kind of with enough distance or further away.
Do you have any history of mental illness in your family?
My dad actually did struggle with major depression too, so I think he empathized with me a little bit. But I think my mom did too. I mean, she may not have gone through like a very severe, prolonged depression, but I think she has felt like that before. And yeah, I think they did understand that. At least they did in high school. Maybe perhaps not afterwards when it was getting really bad and out of control. And then the mania, none of us had any familiarity with that, so they still talk about that like we don't know what happened. That was just who knows what that was. And it's kind of weird. I know what it was mania. But it doesn't matter. I mean, not everyone's gonna get it.
Do you have you say not everyone's gonna get it. Do you feel like you want people to understand your experience?
Yeah, I wish they could. I guess it also takes a while for me to really get to know people and trust them before I want to tell them anything like that. But yeah, I would like people to know, and to know that it doesn't, it's not defining me, but it's something that I deal with, and I'm probably going to have to deal with for a long time.
And you have friends who you've met through sharing about your mental health, is that correct?
Yep. I am a regular member of a support group for depression and bipolar. And I think that's been one of the best things for me, is being able to connect that way with other people. That's been something that I just haven't been able to find the same thing anywhere else before I found this group. So I'm really grateful for that.
Well, Kay, thank you so much for sharing with me today.
Thank you.
And I hope to talk more soon. Thank you again to my guest, Kay. She is heavily involved with the local chapter of a support group with the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance. To learn more, visit dbsalliance.org. And Kay would love to hear from people who have any thoughts or questions, and can be reached by email at shypride90@gmail.com. That's CHIPRIDE90@gmail.com. Kay, all the best. That wraps up this episode of Crazy Right with Dave Asher. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider writing a review or rating this podcast. And of course, we would love it if you subscribe. I'm Dave Asher, and I'm glad to be here.